Just a little bit about warranty and certification first of all. We're an independent certification body. Independent means that we have a management council. Now the management council is made up of key stakeholders, so insurance, building control, C4, Chief Fire Officers Association, and that panel decides and dictates what we do, and that's chaired by Sir Ken Knight. So Sir Ken Knight chairs that panel. So whatever we come up with, it goes by them, and if it's in interest of the public, then they let us go ahead and do that. We do voluntary certification, Certifier. Certifier is certificating fire safety products like fire doors, incandescent paints, those kind of things, to make sure they're consistent and repeatable, and the end user's buying something that is actually been tested and the manufactured in the same way as it was tested. We also do Fire S, and that's the installers of those. There's no point in buying a fantastic door set that's been tested and then getting someone to put it in that's just an odd job man, because it's not going to do the job it's supposed to do. So we certificate fire installation companies. FRAX is our new scheme, Fire Risk Assessor Certification Scheme. I'll go on to that in a minute. Certi Secure, that's in support of the Secure by Design. So that's all about locks and latches and those kind of things. And obviously ISO 9001, most of you will be familiar with that. We've got mandatory certification, wheel mark, and that goes into ships. Anything that goes on the ship has to be of limited combustibility and known performance, has to be audit tested. So your manufacturers can't just send something in to be tested. We have to go out to the factory and actually select it off the production line. Obviously in a ship, there's nowhere to go, so you don't want things burning. And also CE marking, certification and support CE marking. We're also an independent inspection body, and that means we've been accredited to that standard 17020 by UCAS to go out and inspect things. We mainly concentrate on passive, but we also do sprinklers as well. So in case there's a dispute or something like that, where your contractors come in and said, I fitted this properly, we can come in and actually audit the whole thing. We're not selling any service on the back, we just provide a report, and it's an independent report that you can both abide by. Competent fire risk assessors. What I'm going to do is talk about the problems, the reality, the solution, and the future. Those of you that can't see, that isn't me, despite showing the same stylish haircut as that gentleman. I am not a fire risk assessor. I could be. On paper, I absolutely am. I've attended the courses, I've done enough, but I'm not a risk assessor. I've never done a risk assessment. I don't want to do a risk assessment unless I get made unemployed, and then the first thing I'm going to do is become a risk assessor, because there's no requirements. Anyone can do it. You can set yourself up tomorrow as a fire risk assessor. So why not? And people are making good money out of it too. Obviously, the reality solution in the future. Now, this is a problem. It's a risk-based DIY legislation. Okay? So that means that it's up to you. The government have deregulated it. It used to be prescriptive and done by the fire service. Now it's up to you. In Northern Ireland, incidentally, that's coming out this month, I think. I was speaking to a guy in Northern Ireland last week, and they're going to pretty much copy the Scottish regulations. Just to prove it's a DIY approach here, the DIY manuals that the government gave you. So if you've got an office or a shop or a sleeping accommodation, you can pick up one of these manuals and you can look through this manual. It should tell you everything you need to know about doing your risk assessment. The problem, the DIY approach is flawed. It's obviously flawed. Okay, I'm going to try and demonstrate that through my garden gate. Looks okay, doesn't it? I built that myself out of some scrap wood. The trouble is, when we moved into that property 2 years ago, that garden gate was rotten, absolutely rotten, and it needed doing. And it took me 2 years to get round to it, and that's a big problem with the regulations as it is. People are just delaying getting their risk assessments. There you go, 4 years on. After a London-based food factory owner has been prosecuted and fined after breaching fire safety regulations, a suitable and sufficient fire risk assessment had not been completed. Not done it. £20,000. I spoke to a guy on Wednesday, one of our certificated risk assessors. There was a social housing company approached him and said to him, we've got no risk assessments for any of our property stock at all. How quickly can you do it and how cheaply can you do it? And that was their requirement. How fast can you do it and how cheap can you do it? Because if you've got a risk assessment, even if the fire and rescue service come, at least you've got a risk assessment. That's all they wanted. They wanted a piece of paper as quickly as possible. Is that gate fit for purpose? Well, I didn't have any clamps, I didn't have any wood glue. I kind of screwed it all together, so you can see it's coming apart already. There's little gaps in the left where the jigsaw went off. So, and it doesn't matter really on my gate, does it, if I make mistakes? But if you're doing a risk assessment, it does make a difference. It can make a huge difference. Not only that, the day I put it on, I stood back and I was really pleased with it, and I was admiring it. And my son, 4-year-old son, came out, and I changed the way it operated. I changed it, so he pushed it instead of pulling it. The thing came off the wall. The whole thing just came off, and it's been off 3 times since. You know, so I'm bodged it. It's a botched job, and that's a worrying concern that the DIY legislation allows you to do a botched job. You know, risk assessments are poor. In fact, 40% of the risk assessments that the Fire and Rescue Service audit are not suitable and sufficient. And they're only doing about 5% of their property stock. Most of the Fire and Rescue Service are only doing about 5% of audits. So it's going to take them 20 years to get through all the buildings that they need to look at to audit. So it's a big concern. There, just to prove an example, fit for purpose, a London hotel and its manager have been ordered to pay more than £30,000 in fines and costs after being found guilty of breaching fire safety regulations, unsuitable or insufficient fire risk assessment. So although they had a risk assessment, they had a fire, and it wasn't suitable or sufficient. Now, the worrying thing is, if nationals and multinationals can get this wrong, there's a fair chance that everyone else is getting it wrong. Yep. They've got pretty unlimited resources. Tesco's, you wouldn't think they could get it wrong. Obviously they have. New Look, everyone knows about New Look, hopefully. The biggest fine ever for a fire. And even the department that sorted this out, that delivered the legislation, communities, they've got that wrong as well. So it's a bit of concern. Co-op, by the way, that's an interesting example. They had a fire in one of their stores. The Fire and Rescue Service came. They looked at the risk assessment. In fact, I don't think they had a risk assessment, or it was pretty poor. They said, how many stores you've got in the area? And they said 10, I think it was, and they went round every single one and find them all. So the fine was increased. Now, that should be a concern for you. If you've got a big property stock and you have a fire and the Fire and Rescue Service turn up, there's a very good chance that they're going to go round all your properties after that to make sure.